All right, here is lesson 1 for chapter 12, Manifest Destiny in Oregon Country. Essential question is discuss the concept of manifest destiny, its effects on westward expansion, and identify events that promoted it. You see in front of you here is a series of trails leading into the west that are bringing Americans in larger and larger numbers, especially after right around the time of 1837, the Panic of 1837, into the west to seek greater opportunity. And when those numbers get to a certain point, they kind of want to connect themselves to the Union and become a territory and eventually a state. But of course, that's going to cause some conflict. This particular image is the image that really portrays the concept of manifest destiny. Here you see a particular angel-like kind of figure. Here you would associate this with a higher power, or perhaps God. Images quite often, when artists paint them, have a left and a right, a front and a back to them. Here you can see darkness on the left, light on the right. If you put this into a set of the cardinal directions, this would be the east and the west. Here is a higher power leading civilization, industrialism, Americans to the west, where there is darkness, there's a lack of civilization, putting pressure on Native Americans, animals fleeing into the west. You see different types of economic activity here as well, and exemplified here by this individual holding a shovel, which would represent the miners, who are some of the first people to go out into the west. We'll talk about the ones that lead the way and get out there before them, but the mining industry will be significant here, and part of another lesson coming up with the discovery of gold in California, and of course the farmers behind them. But there is a depiction here that there is darkness, there is good from the right moving to the left, civilization from left to right, civilization from the European point of view, and a telegraph wire that this lady here, also known as Columbia, is bringing with her. This image is called American Progress, right around the year 1872, post-Civil War time period, by John Gast, and Columbia, was the personification of the United States, and was going to bring all these positive things into the West, and to bring improvement into the West and to the Western territories. Fix this a second. We see the different stages of activity going on here, and Native Americans and animals flee into the darkness, and of course that highlights the conflict that's going to occur here moving into the west, so on and so forth. This manifest destiny is defined by this higher power and something that is just going to happen. It's definite. The term manifest, you don't have this in your outline notes, but go ahead and write it down, basically means clear or obvious to the eye or mind, something that's definitely going to happen. Our destiny is manifest in the land and in the West. The destiny of Americans' democracy is there. It will necessarily happen. There's no way to stop this. If you think about humans versus gods or higher powers, it's set and established by them, and all we have to do is follow. This is just going to happen. This becomes the mindset of Americans, especially taking hold in the 1830s, 1840s. With this first half of the 19th century, specifically triggered by the Panic of 1837, heavily here, in economic depression, people move into the West looking for greater opportunity via a series of trails, especially into Oregon to start, and looking for that greater opportunity. Starting over in the West was a theme. This was really a big theme throughout American society. If you fail economically in one part of the country, the eye and the mind's eye was always on the West and cheap available land out there. And this is also a colonial ideal. This has very deep roots. In that, when we have our independence and we establish a democratic republic, we're going to bring something better, something unique and significant and exceptional to the world and society. By moving into the West, we are expanding that, and that is good. And this starts to change when we get in the 1800s, 1803, Louisiana Purchase. The idea and concept that, man, we could possibly occupy the whole continent. The War of 1812, if you remember, was a bit of a war to expand from the Warhawk Southern point of view. John Quincy Adams said this is just going to happen, just like the Mississippi flows. You can't stop it. It's just an immovable force. Where does the term come from? The term comes from and is embedded in the year 1845 in a debate about Texas. And this is part of your lesson 2 videocast coming up. Texas becomes a republic in 1836, and the argument was whether or not to allow Texas to come into the Union. And we'll see why that happens for similar reasons we talk about here today. And this guy by the name of John O'Sullivan a columnist, wrote this document called Annexation. And he basically said that manifest destiny to overspread and possess the whole of the continent, in which providence, which refers to capital P here, a higher power or God, has given us for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions. And this becomes the phrase that is utilized after this argument that he portrays for, yes, the United States should annex Texas. And of course, if we bring in one state, we know, and we've talked about before, that brings in 2 more senators into the United States Congress. But the key differences and the key issue here is what kind of senators? Are they from a slave state, or are they a slave state type senator, or are they a northern free state type senator? That flows and throws off the balance of power and things. That's important here in this time period. The early 1800s, Oregon and Oregon Territory, where people are starting to go to seek greater opportunity, especially settling in this place called the Willamette Valley. Again, if you recall, it was jointly occupied by 4 different nations here. As you see, the United States wanted to annex it. This is in particular the area where Lewis and Clark treaded, and so therefore Americans say it should be ours. There are British people here, there are Russian people here, there are Spanish people here in different numbers. And over the years, through the Adamonis Treaty and in 1824, Russia basically giving up claim to certain parts of this particular territory, it comes down to the United States and Britain having the final claim to this territory. And if you recall, John Quincy Adams had talked about, getting Britain to agree to this parallel here, the 49th parallel in 1825 to divide the place. The British refused. They agreed to a joint occupied kind of a scenario starting in 1818. And there it lasted and stayed until about that point in time. And this west, again, is very important for a lot of fur trading and fur trading activity out here. Well, we'll see also mining and other things are going to be going on out here as well. But there were Americans. Who were the Americans going out there before 1837? Some of the first Americans out there were fur traders and trappers. The fur industry is still huge yet at this time as it was in the early colonial period. And once the animals get trapped out, pretty soon then people start moving in there for land to farm it, so on and so forth. Missionaries also moved out there to convert Native Americans to Christianity. They brought disease that resulted in attacks and conflict with them and drove good numbers of them out. But then once we get again back to the year 1837, Americans start moving out there in very much larger numbers, and this is going to bring them into the numbers and size of numbers of people that are going to all of a sudden have enough power and influence to say we want to be a part of the United States, and thus a little conflict possibly is going to happen with Britain. An example of this would be one of these early trappers and traders is actually a true individual here by the name of a nickname Grizzly Adams. If you want to look it up on YouTube, you can go ahead and watch a little trailer of a television show in 1877 was about this trapper who tamed a grizzly bear, real story, and lived out in the wild and lived out in the mountains and lived off the land hunting and trapping and so on and so forth. Kind of interesting stuff. And so this Panic of 1837 really triggers a westward movement here and the development of something called the Oregon Trail. And you can still actually see it today. If you go to YouTube, you can find the Oregon Trail tracks and ruts in the ground and so on and so forth. And it's a 2,000-mile trek. It's hazardous. It's treacherous. Thousands of miles of people moved out there to settle out in this western region. And they actually left their mark out there. There's actually some organizations that actually recreate or retrace these routes and load up their wagons and horses and reenact the movement on the Oregon Trail. And people are moving there in significant numbers. They're traveling on these things called prairie schooners along particular rivers like the Platte River across the Great Plains. It is a very treacherous kind of a scenario. And large numbers did die along the way. And they start in Independence, Missouri, and they basically hire guides. Some of these guides were former trappers out in the West who knew Native Americans and knew the land, and they would get paid as a tour guide to kind of get these group of people out to where they're supposed to be. As these Americans move out there, so by the 1840s, we have a majority of Americans populating this area, jointly held Oregon Territory, and there's pressure for the United States to own all of Oregon. And a slogan that comes up about this particular territory is 5440 or fight. You see it right up there, that parallel. Here's the 49th parallel. Americans, and particular Americans anyway, are going to argue that this should be where the boundary is for the United States and claim all of this. And Britain is not going to like that so much. And this is especially the area of dispute here where the heaviest crossover population is. And the issue of slavery and the spread of slavery is going to be a factor here. Number of slave states versus number of free states, and the balance of the slave versus free states in the United States Senate and power, and the ability to block or promote one side of the country or section of the country and their interests versus another is at stake here. And this election has the Democrats putting up a guy by the name of James J. Polk as their candidate. He's from North Carolina, a southern state, and the party slogan becomes 54 for-year fight. We're willing to fight Britain for that territory up until that parallel, or that line of latitude, excuse me. This should be the new border in Oregon, and should be American. At the same time, in this year and for several years, since 1836, you may want to annotate that here, and this will be talked about more in your Lesson 2 videocast, Texas has been an independent republic, but they've requested being part of the United States. There are a lot of Americans down there, and this is a controversial thing because it would add as you can tell, probably a slave state. A good number of these Americans traveled from the South into Texas, and they're slave-minded or slave-owning type people, and that would, again, affect the balance between North and South in terms of number of states and the balance of power in the Senate. This is a controversial thing, but this Polk is an expansionist. He wants to grow the country, and Americans like it, and because of that, they help elect him to become president in this scenario. And so there is an opposition to this, though. The Whig, and if you look at the Whigs, you have to associate them mostly with Northerners, even though Henry Clay is from Kentucky and a Westerner in the South. It's primarily a Whig, Federalist, National Republican party, think American System. Alexander Hamilton, of that mindset. They oppose annexation of Texas for that reason I just talked about. The why is it would upset the balance of free versus slave states. Not a good thing. You don't have this in your notes either, but you should add it. A new party pops into being in 1840, and it signifies the issue of slavery is becoming very, very much one of importance, especially in the North. And look at where the guy is from. He's from Ohio in the North. The Liberty Party is a one-topic party. They want to abolish slavery, and this starts to cause a stir as well. And that was in 1840 in that election previous. And so slavery is an issue. It's a hot topic. It's growing more and more. The abolitionist movement is growing as well. And Polk is going to become president pretty significantly here, and he wants Britain to give up everything to the 54th parallel. Of course, they do not want to. It looked like there could possibly be war, but there is a treaty that's signed in 1846 establishing the 49th parallel as the boundary, which is the present boundary today. So that is lesson 1 for chapter 12. Here's some information for your left-hand side. Make sure you watch the next lesson. We'll quiz on this and next lesson in the future. Good day.